As we begin, I have to appreciate a few people in the room. Dr. Peter Wanyaga Mudoka, who is the Chancellor at Masinde Muliro University of Science and Technology. I'd like to also appreciate our guests who have come in this morning, starting with our chief guest, Muko Kibati, the CEO of Telecom, Dr. Martin Odwor, Chairman and CEO, Leadership Group Limited, Mr. Peter Opondo, who is a communication and media strategist, who has joined us also this morning, Ms. Eve Mutio, who's head of human capital and non-executive director of Infinite People and Culture Solutions, and myself, who will be the host. Please appreciate me as I continue with this session. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Nathan Kiwere, the publisher. I would like to welcome the panelists. Please tell us, from Dr. Ogola's book, what is one of the greatest quotes or pointer? Because he talks about 10 points that you found within the book.
First and foremost, when I look at that book, I bought that book yesterday and I couldn't get it off my eyes because I was first of all thinking about the way we read books from, just as Mugo has mentioned, that we read books that apply in different contexts. And one lesson that I really love in that book, and that is something very, very close to my heart, is about culture. And one thing that actually Fred has put it out is that there are only two types of culture, a performing culture and performance culture. It now goes back to what I really believe in, and that says is that if in an organization you have leaders who drives values, who drive values, principles, and every time their workforce are always reflecting on what the leaders represent. And that again breaks down to leaders drive behaviors, behaviors drive culture, and the culture will reflect the employees and what kind of an environment employees will all about. So that was my greatest lesson in the strategic plan.
I find Fred a non-conventional strategist and writer. I find Fred a very provocative strategist. And you may not like the way that he goes about doing what he does. What I find with intelligent people is that if you're not as intelligent as them, and I'm one of those guys who are not as intelligent as Fred, you can really get confused in that process. Right, and so you take your time, you go slowly to understand exactly what they're saying. So when I was reading this book, there's a lesson there that Fred calls Romanticized Leadership, right? And he actually mentions me in that chapter. Right? And what he's saying is that, Martin was a very successful leader when he was CEO at KCB Group. And then he was taken out of that environment and placed on the board of Kenya Airways. And Kenya Airways is going nowhere. So what happened to his leadership? We used to think he was a great leader, but how come he cannot help turn Kenya Airways around? Was it just a romanticization of his leadership at KCB and he was actually doing nothing, right? And I said, when I saw that, I said, how can this guy, who I thought was my friend, talk about me in that and actually put it down on paper? And he goes ahead and also gives an example of Michael Joseph at Safaricom. Very successful at Safaricom, but chair of the same Kenya Airways, because he was my chair at Kenya Airways. So he's lumping us in this same boat of romanticized leaders. He's almost saying that companies can run on autopilot at some point, and that leadership is really not the thing that drives companies to success. And there I actually disagree with him, and I haven't had an opportunity to have this conversation with him. Because I find that institutions will thrive or die on leadership. And therefore this notion of you can be a mediocre person and you're put into an autopilot type institution and it continues to perform, in my view that can only happen up to a point. And as you read this book, you will obviously find things that you agree with, things that you don't agree with. But I certainly would invite people to read it and apply their minds. And it's through this that, as leaders, organizations, we continue to grow.
Starting with the statement, almost every CEO, I repeat, almost every CEO will have a plan when it comes to developing a strategy, but only a handful will know how to execute the plan into action. So how exactly does a C-suite executive or any executive in the room who's planning to be one prioritize people and culture, both at large and small-scale initiatives?
I'll quote Dr. Fred because Dr. Fred has taught me to strategic management and decision analysis, and also happens to be my executive coach. And there's one statement he once said that strategy without execution is grammar. That's just too much English on paper, but it also drives down to also an organization understanding what are their key capabilities. Yeah, it has to be a map. And also the strategic thinking also comes in the insights that in the insights that you have thought through so that you execute that plan. I mean, and again, it also boils down to the culture you're creating in the organization. As Fred has put it, there are only two types of cultures in an organization: performing culture and a non-performance culture. You have to have that strategic plan. You also have to break it down into very palatable plans that people can actually go back and actually look at it and ask themselves, the last quarter, what did we do? So I think that's very, very crucial. And also, again, from also the 10 lessons, the time management. I mean, how are you prioritizing? You have to break it down to palatable objectives. You have to communicate to your staff. You have to make them understand why are we doing what we're doing and how do we get there. Yeah.
Mr. Peter Opondo, even in regard to your background, I begin with a statement. Corporations are recognizing the value of marketing, public relations, and digital strategy as social media and internet gain continued momentum and traction in today's marketplace. I would like you to state how well should our CEO understand these concepts, and how do they implement marketing, PR, and digital strategy in the past and in their decision making?
The academic curricula that we have in universities teaches us a lot about what a good strategy looks like. But it doesn't teach us how to formulate a strategy. We conflate or we confuse competitive advantage for strategy. When we come to business schools like Strathmore, we are told to use Porter's 5 forces. Now what Porter did is that he taught you what a good strategy looks like. Porter never taught us how to formulate a strategy. I worked in the media, for example, and all the guys we used to see to be doing strategy and planning, they would say, what is the market leader doing? You're benchmarking and thinking that you're doing strategy. Over the last 2 years, I've had a lot of time, I've been researching, and one of the things that has come very stark clearly to me is that strategy is just about a choice of how you win in the marketplace. It's about a set of integrated choices that you make so that you win at the marketplace. You have to have your winning aspiration. You have to define where you're going to play. You have to define how you're going to play. You have to define the capabilities that you need to develop in order for your strategy to achieve its objectives. And finally, you have to define the enabling management systems that need to be in place for you to achieve your objectives.
What leadership in the area of brand growth is an important part of being a CEO. Business leaders must demonstrate a vision when it comes to growing the brand and sustaining its value through innovation. When it comes to strategic thinking, how do you as a leader address societal issues?
At Deloitte, we called it the cascading choices framework of strategy. You will find that the issue that you're asking about brand and about innovation fits very well as you define who you are, how you will win, what areas you're going to play in, what capabilities you need, how you will measure success. And part of those capabilities will be the capability to innovation. Part of the how you will win will be around innovation. Part of it is going to be around brand. Who am I? What kind of reputation do I have or do I want to have as part of this, and how will that help me win in the areas that I've defined as my playfield? And so those new areas, the examples that you give, like climate change and energy and ESG type areas, must then be a priority for the institution, and it must find its way within the strategy so that it can then be executed. One of the things that I really like about Fred's book is the cases that he brings up there. I mean, there's thousands of cases there, and even if he has not gone in depth with them, it invites us as readers to actually go back and do some research on those, because he's brought them to our face. It's really up to us now to go back and sort of say, if you talk about this company or that company, let me go and learn. And so from a strategic leadership perspective, I see it very much as fitting into the framework that Peter was describing here.
How long does a CEO need to use strategic thinking to determine that the ideas and decisions they put within the company are not working out, or are working out and we should improve them further? How exactly can they determine such programs, and how can they work with the people within the company?
When your staff are working for you, you're adding value to them, you're training them, you're developing them, and then they increase in value. And the fact that human capital plays a very, very critical role, especially in the execution of the strategy, so he or she becomes a very key partner. The best way to actually move forward is actually get out of your comfort zone. You have to learn how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. To sum it up, I'll just say that a CEO needs to define the time frame. Sometimes you might be, I'll again quote Dr. Fred's group, a strategy well thought through, the well thought through process will always help a CEO to always communicate to his employees, or to his greatest asset, which are the employees. What is working? What do we go back? Do we need to give it time? Do we need to, those insights and development that are really aligned to the organization's strategy and the people. Because the value proposition that you give for your employees also has to matter with the employee proposition that the employees are giving to you.
We are told to think this way, that assumptions blind, hypothesis guide. What does that mean? That sometimes we take a strategy and assume that once we formulated a strategy, that's how it should pan out in the market. Ideally, what you should do is that once you've developed a strategy, you make tentative steps. You treat it like a hypothesis. You take it into the market and test and see. So what would have to be true for this to work? So you don't go with assumptions and assume that the market will validate our assumptions. You're going out there knowing that the feedback that I might get in the market may not conform to what I had initially thought about it. And that means your strategy has to be dynamic. No strategy, no idea survives contact with the market in the original form that it was formed. And that's the fact that we should bear in mind as we think about strategy formulation.
There's that famous statement, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that normally tends to refer to the culture of the organization. But he's talking about the market. It's quite true. I mean, that particular statement, first of all, is true, that the first challenge with strategy is your own organization, your own team. And when I said right from the exco, I think Martin will agree. But the other point now to the point about the market is that, yes, I agree. You have to sandbox, you have to pilot. Sandboxing and piloting is a very important part of strategy, where you actually say, even in little things like how the market will react to a particular new service or product or new vision, And therefore, it is true that you can never assume that what you have come up in a boardroom, 7 minds, with the data that you have at the time that you have it, will necessarily work as you thought it would work 2 months down the road in a completely different context. I mean, July 2022, I can assure you any strategies that we are developing or we developed in April and May of 2022 as to how the market will react to anything we do, given what's happening now. Who knows what kind of temperatures will be in July of 2022, given the campaign season. And therefore it's true that so it must be dynamic. I've experienced that it has to be dynamic, and you have to be willing to tweak, if not even completely give up, a strategy that you have become emotionally attached to because you spend so much time on it if the market tells you otherwise.
if you just reflect on the last 2 or 3 years of COVID, it brought corporates to the realization that our 5-year plans, basically thrown out of the window because you had to take specific actions based on what was happening in your environment, whether you call it a market or competition, whether you just call it the operating environment. And so, I mean, I'm associated with 2 businesses, which, one is the airline. I retired from the board in May last year. But with all the planes grounded, all the 43 planes on the ground, and you have a 5-year strategy which says we shall fly like this and we shall make this kind of money. What do you do with all your 43 planes on the ground? And so do you still say we have a 5-year strategy, or do you start saying, okay, how do we respond to this, and what routes, what alternatives? If people are not flying, can we fly cargo? What else? They need medicines and PPEs, etc. So a very, very, and this is where time comes in. A very, very rapid kind of thinking, strategic thinking here in terms of what you do. I'm also associated with Isaac and Breweries, where I'm the chairman, and with all the bars closed. And this is a social product. We enjoy our drink, long into the night, and now we can't go out. And again, what does leadership then do in that kind of institution, that kind of situation? And so, Peter, I'm just agreeing with you and agreeing with Mugo that strategy must be dynamic, and in fact, what I've realized in the institutions that I've been involved with more recently is that people you have the long-term view, but you also have very, very short-term execution in response to what is happening around you. So well put by yourselves. Thanks.
In lieu of strategic thinking, what are examples of successful long-term marketing and PR campaigns CEOs have personally directed that you've seen have gained market share or given profit to the company, etc.?
No. I think that one of the ones that I worked with is at Royal Media, and that's when we turned Citizen TV around. That was about 2009, and when by the time I joined in 2009, the company had already done the bulk of the work in terms of local content. What was just lacking was the news. And I think what the CEO, who's still the CEO now, Mr. Washira Waruru, did is that he embodied a campaign that you would call We Are Kenyan. Yeah? He didn't say we are Kenyan, but the campaign was clear to you. Never mind that the content was a mix of soaps and a bit of Nigerian movies and local dramas, stripped across the week from Monday to Sunday, 7:30 to 8 o'clock every single day, and then a bit of Nigerian movies. And that was a change in the market. And what he did is that there was a deliberate communication that we are the ones who are representing Kenyanness. And there was a deliberate strategy to say, anytime across the day you would watch, you would see someone that looks like you on the channel. Remember that particular point, apart from KBC or even KBC, every other channel that was a TV channel in Kenya had West Wing, West End, and all that, those kind of programming that were very Western oriented. So the campaign sort of sent a message and related to so many Kenyans, and it brought down the brand to a level that I could associate with it. And I believe that up to today, a brand like Citizen TV is still harvesting that capital that was invested in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012. And also it's by default because no one else in the market has come up with something that will now change the market perception. So if you ask me, that's an example of a CEO that knew exactly how he wanted to differentiate his brand, took the necessary measures, and the market bought into it.
My name is Davis Omondi, Marge Insurance Brokers. This one question is, where is the gap between knowledge and reality of performance? I'm asking this because having been a manager for about 10 years, you train people, Sometimes you say, let me welcome let me employ maybe people who are more schooled than the ones I have. You arrange all this, both on the job and out of the job. But then sometimes they don't relate to results. And you end up with somebody you thought was not schooled. That person you thought is a D material, and he ends up performing. That one who did not negotiate a higher salary becomes a better performer.
I think knowledge gives you the ticket into the room, as it were, right? But once you get into the room, I mean, so football is something that many people relate to. So knowledge gives you the ticket onto the field. But once you get in there, the execution then depends on very many things about you. How passionate are you about what you are doing, right? Can you think on your feet? Do you have all the resources that you need around there? What is the leaderships on the touchline doing, and how are they motivating, encouraging you? There are very many factors here, and I don't think it's as straightforward as saying, a D student will perform better than an A student. What kind of culture exists in that organization, and is it a culture that will enable me to perform to my best, and what is leadership doing about this? So I don't think that there's a straightforward answer to that question that you are raising there. But the important thing is that knowledge is important, but beyond knowledge, there's something else there that then enables you to execute and deliver the results that you are set out for.
People are hired to solve problems. I mean, you might have a degree, you might have a master's and all that. You are hired to solve a problem. And what really makes sometimes you might find in one organization that this strategy worked, but when you go in a different organization, this won't work. So how do you adapt and map out what is really relevant in that organization to make sure that you are successful? Yeah? And I always say that when you join now an organization, now I'm speaking from now an employee perspective, when you join a new organization, you need to identify what really is, what is the philosophy in that organization on its sits. What do they mean when they say that this is how we win? How do you map out the people who are going to make you successful? Yeah, in terms of all your key deliverables that have been given to you. How do you negotiate with your direct line manager? How do you continuously actually do a thorough audit for yourself? I mean, you look at yourself and you say, I was hired to do this job. These are the areas that I'm very good at, and these are the areas I really need to develop on. And you be very true to yourself. So knowledge, knowing what to do and how to do it, has to come from a place of personal initiative.
I'm called Irene. I suppose I'm the youngest in the room, thanks to Dr. Fred Ogola. My question goes to you. Change takes time. I think it's messy at the beginning. And how do you ensure that you prioritize both people and culture to ensure that you bring a better performance culture within the organization?
First, change is the only constant thing. Yeah. So anything else, I mean, change. If an organization wants to change, they always have to remember that change is the only constant thing. And you can't continue doing things the same way and expect different results. So to answer your question, is that leaders should always communicate to their workforce or to their tribe. I call it the tribe organization. Why are we changing? Why do we need to change? How do we change? How do we spearhead this change? And one of the things about change is that, I mean, there are early adapters, there are people who are going to adapt when already it takes time. There are others sometimes will sabotage that change, and as a leader, you have no choice other than to just let them go. So yeah, always remembering why do we need to change? It needs to be communicated well. Always put the values into context, because that's what's going to drive the behaviors when you're focusing on that change. Yeah.
My name is Dr. Philippe. I'm a trade finance expert within the finance industry. What would you have picked out in terms of, because I tend to agree, yes, this is the dynamic strategy. Would you have thought of perhaps situational
strategic leadership, because today I would have a well-performing leader put in a situation where he can perform, and then the same well-performing leader perhaps put in a situation where it could be tricky to perform, fails to perform. Thank you.
On the question of romanticized leadership, I think what Fred has done is just to kind of open up a whole conversation around this. The other person that he mentions in that book is Julius Kipgetich, who was renowned to have done a lot of work at KWS, and then I think he went to Uchumi and things went south. And so Fred calls this romanticized leadership. And I think without really answering the question, there's a discussion here, there's a big discussion that this opens up, right? Are they the environmental factors within that institution? Is it a culture? How much time do you have as a leader to deal with these issues there? What is the support base like? What's the board and the management? And Muko talked about the 7 people that report to you. You are 7 people who enabled you to do stuff where you are. Do the new 7 people enable you, or do they distract you from what you're supposed to be doing? And this is why it may not be about the romance here. There are other factors here that if we have time, we can actually dig into that. We could actually go into, take one of these guys and actually double click on each of these institutions and find out exactly what happened that made him or her successful here, and made him what Fred thinks is not successful in this other environment. So let me leave it there on account of time. In this